which means if somebody puts the information on that ID through some sort of database that checks to see if people can actually get jobs, there can't be any errors, which means some of the IDs floating around out there got into the hands of criminals in an illegitimate manner. Now, the way for criminals to get their first few IDs that they sell are to have themselves, friends, or family members recreate a legitimate ID and then sell those IDs to people who kind of look like whoever's on the picture, but that's not going to work forever. And the fact that there's demand for these things should terrify everyone who's ever been involved in some sort of data breach. If your identity or personal documents have ever leaked, a more sophisticated criminal could use that information to recreate your ID with someone else's picture on it, and then they could sell it an unlimited number of times to an unlimited number of people. This article says a legit driver's license will go for $500. The New York Post found gang members in Queens selling IDs from $80 to $250, some of which were obviously bogus. But what this reveals is that even somebody who is well-meaning for the most part has to subject themselves to the criminal underworld if they want to get a legitimate-looking job in this city, or in any city in America for that matter. Even so, there are people out there defending illegal labor practices as being good for the entire country.
Even at my dry cleaner, I went the other day, and there was nobody there. And she said, well, I let my employees go down to the protest in Newark. She said, and then she asked me, do you think this is good for the small business community? And I went, well, look at your shop. This is one day. What happens when your employees just don't come in, people?
So here's what's going to happen. That business, they're going to be forced to hire legally, and thay're going to be forced to play by the rules. When businesses and everybody plays by the rules, the country is better off.
Yeah, because you're not paying people slave wages. See, when you pay people under minimum wage, that's slave wages. Why is it so horrible that I don't want us to have slave wages? I don't want slaves. Why does that make me racist? And people that do want slaves, that want open borders, why are they not the bad guy? Since they want slavery, and since they're racist, obviously. It makes no sense. It's called doublespeak.
The country is not better off if businesses break the law to get a leg up on their competitors while acting like they are engaging in some noble pursuit that's not at all related to money, especially when giving those jobs just leads to numbers like this, where 17% of people aged 16 to 24 can't get jobs in New York City. And these are people who would be willing to work in an air-conditioned business where they can bring their smartphone like a grocery store or a bodega. These are not people who won't work because
Yeah. If you got people if you have millions of people working at McDonald's, these businesses can hire somebody easily. They just don't want to pay legal wages. They want to pay slave wages because they're horrible, horrible people.
Because they refuse to do the jobs that exist. And here's the thing, these businesses like this dry cleaners mentioned by that news anchor, of course they're not hiring people who they think are victims of trafficking. And they might think they're playing by the rules because so many businesses here don't. And the most maddening thing about all of this is, yes, New York is a sanctuary city, but it's also very progressive. And who do progressives say they're sticking up for? The little guy. They're out there on one hand advocating for the little guy to get higher wages and more protections, but at the same time, they're totally okay with businesses who don't do any of that in the name of open borders.
Yeah, you see the hypocrisy of the whole thing. Yeah, we're for the little people, but we want to pay them slave wages. Yeah, okay.
Minimum wage in New York is $16.50 an hour, and ask any progressive, they'll tell you that's too low. And they'll tell you that greedy businesses should be paying more because workers are the most valuable input in any economy. Unless, of course, those workers are in the country illegally. If that's the case, there is nobody advocating for them to get higher wages or more protections. There's just anger at the fact that ICE is here and might arrest somebody who's a criminal. And this
Yeah, what they're upset about is ICE is coming to take their slaves away. Like, how dare them try to come and take their slaves?
It's progressives in sanctuary cities in a catch-22. Here they are advocating for policies that disenfranchise workers who they say are already disenfranchised by virtue of their immigration status. And these unlawful workers, they don't have the one thing legitimate workers have, which protects them. And that is the power to walk away from any business they feel isn't treating them fairly and work somewhere else. That's not possible if the only job you can get is because the people working there are willing to break the law. And this
Yeah, that's called slavery. Yeah, that's what that's called.
Brings up a big question. Are the businesses who are hiring people illegally doing something good? Or are they just doing something that's good for their bottom line at the expense of the rest of society? And does that empower the very criminals and gang members ICE may have to raid a business to find in the first place? Let me know what you think about that. Thank you. So, New York City's flagship shelter, the Roosevelt Hotel, is finally closing down along with 53 other facilities. But this hotel and some of the other shelters house known gang members who use them as bases to plan and commit crime all over town.
And it's illegal for the police to go into any of these migrant hotels. It's illegal. So the cartels have full reign over all the illegal aliens that came to get a better life, get away from the cartels. And what do? We shove them into hotels with a whole bunch of cartel members. Yeah, that's real good.
And as these places close down, New York City reveals it's not only learned nothing from this experience, but the city's actively opening new shelters which also have no safeguards in place to stop the wrong people from taking them over as well.
Well, the city announcing plans today to shut down one of its largest migrant shelters.
After 2 years, the Roosevelt Hotel will no longer operate as an intake center or emergency shelter.
The 450 remaining migrant families living in tents at Brooklyn's Floyd Bennett Field must move out.
They've been hearing rumors.
A new men's migrant shelter opening in New York City is leaving some neighbors absolutely furious. The new facility has 2,200 beds.
A dangerous South American street gang, Trende Aragua, has infiltrated city shelters, running illegal operations right under the noses of authorities.
I am now terrified.
And how do they do it? Oh, easy. Because it's illegal for police to go into these hotels and these camps.
Terrified for me, for my students.
You should be ashamed.
At the peak 17 months ago, the city was welcoming 4,000 migrants per week, but things have dramatically changed. Last week, less than 400 showed up, and about 1,000 left.
There's cops outside, and I think this is the most we've seen throughout the day of men lining up with their bags. And as you've said, people in the area, locals, are really upset.
So the most infamous of all New York City shelters will shut down permanently in just a few months. But what nobody's talking about is that New York City's right to shelter system that created the problems in that hotel and the entire asylum crisis, those aren't going anywhere. How are you? And as America's largest sanctuary city closes down some of its shelters, it's trying its best to secretly open new ones in other parts of town, like the Bronx, where a 2,000-person men's shelter is already up and running, much to the chagrin of nervous neighbors who say they weren't even told this place was coming to their very backyard. And as a sanctuary city, New York bans police from entering these facilities, which is why they're so easy for gang members and criminals to take over. A problem that didn't just happen at the Roosevelt Hotel, where the Trende Aragua gang has been operating for months, but also at other places like the Hall Street shelter in Brooklyn, which houses 3,000 people and has brought extreme gang activity to the quiet streets of Clinton Hill, something that our leaders thought would never happen, as that facility is sequestered between a highway overpass and the waterfront. Yet, because this city protects its criminals instead of locking them up, it did. Which brings us to the real reason why New York City's mega shelters are such a problem. The asylum crisis is over. You can no longer enter the country, apply for asylum, and wait around to see what happens. Which means the only new arrivals moving into our shelters are going to be people who can only live in America illegally. But as a sanctuary city that bans its officials from inquiring about anyone's immigration status, our shelter system will continue to remain open, acting as a magnet for those unlawfully in the country who want a free place to stay. However, there's a problem because the border is now closed and almost impossible to cross. And as you're about to see, this means the only people who do get through are going to be folks who are very tough and who have no plans other than living a life of crime once they get here.
A new men's migrant shelter opening in New York City is leaving some neighbors absolutely furious. The new facility in the Bronx has 2,200 beds, and it's part of Mayor Adams' strategy to consolidate.
There is a ton of controversy surrounding this new facility that's opening up in the Bronx, but that controversy isn't because it's a luxury hotel in Midtown. It's not. And whereas the Roosevelt Hotel you see here is in a commercial part of town that isn't really a neighborhood, that's not the case for this new new Bronx shelter, it's surrounded by apartments that house families. There are schools and playgrounds nearby. Locals are calling this new shelter in the Bronx their absolute worst fear, and they didn't even know it was coming until the last minute. And the reason people are worried is they know this is a sanctuary city that doesn't do background checks before moving people into its shelters, which is exactly what was happening here at the Roosevelt Hotel and how this place became so controversial and dangerous. And the folks living near this new facility are afraid that their neighborhood is going to become a home to gangs and the violence that they bring with them.
It's really very large. As you said, 2,200 people can be housed here. We've seen a pretty steady stream of people. There's cops outside, and I think this is the most we've seen throughout the day of men.
Now, it's important to understand that the folks moving into this new facility, they might be well-meaning, they might not be. They might have criminal records, they might not. We're never going to know because the city doesn't do background checks before moving people into places like this. And it turns out that some of the people moving to this new Bronx shelter are coming from facilities that have a history of gang activity and dangerous incidents, and city officials have confirmed that many of the folks moving into the new Bronx shelter are coming from Randall's Island, which was one of the most dangerous shelters New York City operates. And according to the New York Post, this is a facility that functioned as the headquarters of this Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, where known gang members not only resided, but camped out nearby in pup tents after getting kicked out of the shelter or losing their placement due to it expiring. This shelter, when it was open, always had a heavy police presence, and at many times the unlawful encampments outside this place got so rough that the police had to go in and clear them out. However, they always seemed to keep coming back. Now, is everybody who lived at Randall's Island bad news? No, but if the entire population of that shelter is being relocated to this new one in the Bronx, how could the problems that existed in one place not be relocated as well? That's what neighbors are freaking out about.
I had never been afraid of the South Bronx. I am now terrified. I'm terrified for me, for my students. I will have to move.
As literally someone that has lived this experience personally, you should be ashamed.
So people in the Bronx, they don't want to pay to house unvetted individuals who might be coming from places that are very dangerous in their neighborhoods by their families and near where their kids go to school. And that's the difference between the Bronx facility and the Roosevelt Hotel, which isn't in a neighborhood. Thus, you didn't have mass neighborhood protests when this place first opened up, even though everybody that took a look at it knew something wasn't right. And you've got progressives in other New York City neighborhoods who don't have shelters in them, who are watching this on the news and don't think this is a big deal. They don't think neighbors here should be making a big deal about this and that they're overreacting. But the new Bronx facility is actually very similar to this one on Hall Street, which also has its fair share of problems. And there were several gang-related incidents that took place here last summer. And just like the new Bronx facility, this Hall Street place, it's in an old industrial park type area. It's over by the highway. There aren't any apartments directly adjacent to it or across the street. And activists love saying that since buildings like this are empty, they'd be great places for shelters because there won't be any effect on the surrounding neighborhood. However, if you talk to the neighbors in Clinton Hill, Brooklyn, they'll point out that there's constantly stuff going on underneath that highway overpass, which is against the law. And the problem is that if you allow unchecked crime in a building or in a certain part of town, it's gonna flow from that location to other locations. Here's a picture of some of the gang members that live in the Roosevelt Hotel in an article talking about crime in Midtown where it's located. And now the big question is, why on earth is the city doing this? If the asylum crisis is dwindling and less people than ever are coming here, why are we reopening new facilities after shutting down the ones we have?
Do you believe the city's ready to close these shelters?
No, because it's like it's like rearranging the chairs on the Titanic. All they're gonna do, we have to house people.
Mayor Adams said the decision was made based on a major decrease in the number of incoming migrants. That number.
So when this local leader says that we have to house people, he's referring to the city's right to shelter obligations, which mandate that New York maintain emergency shelter options for people who need a temporary place to stay. And because places like the Roosevelt Hotel are so expensive to operate, once they can be shut down, the city is going to do it. But because they've still got people to take care of, they're going to move them to another more affordable location. But because the border is now closed and less people than ever are coming here, There's now no longer any justification for keeping these shelters going in the first place other than it being a right, because the rules have changed. People can no longer enter America and apply for asylum and wait in America to see how that case plays out. And what that means is new people arriving at these facilities and checking into them for the first time will not be eligible for asylum. And what that means is they do not have a potential legal pathway to a full-time legal existence in America. No,